listening to the Guille-Allès Public Library podcast, with me, Adam Bayfield. This is the first in a series of podcasts recorded at the Guernsey Literary Festival, which took place over the second weekend of May 2017 and was a tremendous success. Coming soon, you'll hear my interviews with some of the other visiting authors, including the novelist Claire Mackintosh, science writer Simon Singh, and historian Hugh Lewis-Jones. And on today's show, you'll hear from Chris Riddell, who for the past 2 years has served as the UK's Children's Laureate. Chris is the award-winning illustrator and author of more than 100 children's books, including the series Ottoline and Goth Girl. Those series he wrote himself, but he's also illustrated for some amazing and very famous children's authors, including Neil Gaiman, Paul Stewart, Catherine Cave, and even Russell Brand. He's the first ever 3-time winner of the Kate Greenaway Medal for Illustration, winning in 2001 for Pirate Diary, in 2004 for Gulliver, and in 2016 for The Sleeper and the Spindle, written by Neil Gaiman. As you'll hear, Chris is particularly proud of these awards, as the Greenaway Medal, along with its sister award, the Carnegie Medal, are the only children's book awards judged exclusively by librarians. And in his 2 years as Children's Laureate, Chris has been a passionate supporter of libraries. This conversation was recorded here at the Guille-Allès Library shortly before a free talk he gave in front of dozens of children and their parents. He answered questions submitted by the children, telling stories about how he came up with the characters in his books and when he first learned to draw, while all the time sketching, and what he was drawing was projected up on a big screen behind his head. It's a shame his schedule limited him to just 45 minutes, because I could have sat and watched him do that for hours. So without further ado, here's Chris Riddell, talking about libraries, drawing, and how, despite being in Guernsey for less than 24 hours, he's already fallen in love with it. I'm here at the library with Chris Riddell. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Chris.
My pleasure.
So you're only in Guernsey for quite a short time. You've had a pretty hectic schedule, I think, today, going around various schools. You're doing a talk here at the library in a minute. So your feet haven't really touched the ground, but are you having a good time?
Well, my feet did touch the ground. In fact, they touched sand, and that was yesterday. So I flew in yesterday afternoon, and I sat and watched the glorious sunset from Kobo Beach, and then had fish and chips whilst looking over the sea. I thought, well, this thing happens to me often when I travel from place to place. I suddenly want to live in these beautiful places, and quite frankly, I want to live in Guernsey now. It will join a list: Glasgow, Brooklyn, Cape Town, Vancouver, many places, but Guernsey's there now.
Well, that's some pretty good company, isn't it? I mean, and you mentioned how much travelling you do. You are, of course, the UK's Children's Laureate, which does involve a lot of travelling. It's your last month in the job, though, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And it's been an absolutely thrilling 2 years, and I couldn't have known quite what I would do during this time, because in a sense that's not the role. I mean, the role, I think, is to talk about things that I know all of us care a lot about in the education field and in the library and public sector field. It's about promoting reading. It's about talking about children's books and the importance that they hold as great bridges into lifelong reading. I've been given that platform to talk, and that's been a great honour. But it's also been, and they didn't tell me this at the time, it's also been tremendous fun. And I've loved it. And I've loved the interactivity, I think, that the role suggests, that you can draw and post something on social media. You can come along and do a podcast at Guernsey Library. That was a wonderful thing to do.
One of the highlights, I imagine.
No, I'm loving this. You can go on stage at the National Theatre and draw poets reading their poems to 20 schools from London who all come in. I've been in lots of different places, and all the time drawing, because that's what I do as an illustrator. I want it to be a very transparent thing. As Children's Laureate, I am an illustrator who loves working with writers and poets, and my medium is the drawn image.
Well, yeah, actually, it's occurred to me that podcasting is probably the wrong medium for you, isn't it? And that we can't see your illustrations. But I was just thinking because...
Do you know, I would take issue with you there. I don't think it is the wrong medium. I can describe drawing, and talking about drawing is almost as much fun as drawing. And what I really like about podcasts, and you hit upon this, is that you can listen while you're drawing. So the audience can actually have a pencil in their hand and they can be drawing.
I mean, how does it work? Because I speak as someone who... I think my year 9 art teacher is probably still weeping in a corner somewhere. I was always absolutely hopeless at drawing. I mean, we've just seen you do a kind of impromptu sketch for drawing the founders of the library, Guille-Allès. I mean, do you sort of see it in your head first, or do you just kind of put pencil to paper and see what comes out?
I think that maybe is the heart of what drawing is. And for me, and I'm going to sound a little bit pretentious, but I'm not going to apologize for this, I see drawing very much as a verb rather than a noun. It's not the finished piece. It's not the drawing. It's the act of drawing. And I'm so keen to encourage children and adults to take up this thing, for children not to stop, for adults to take it back up again, to draw as an activity. And the way in, I think, is to doodle, because everyone can doodle. It doesn't. If I talk to a sort of businessman and I say, do a doodle in the margins of it, they understand, oh, yes, we can do this. If I talk to a very small child and say, just have fun making, they take to it, absolutely. And it's this idea of not stopping drawing. Because we get to a certain stage, and I see this often, where, in a sense, we judge our own drawing. It's not good enough. It's not right. We stop drawing. And what I'm so keen to demonstrate, in a sense, is that it is a fun activity. Let's all do it. It's meditative. It's the next step on from those colouring books. Let's move on. Let's have these extraordinary books. They're a bit like colouring books, but they have blank pages. And you can doodle in them, and you can draw in them, and draw every day. And it's a message I've been sort of banging on about this 2 years, and that's part of what I like to do. Actually sit in front of an audience and draw for them.
And of course, you've won the Kate Greenaway Medal for Illustration 3 times, I think. You're the first 3-time winner of
Yes, I am.
Of that award.
Yes.
So you're nominated again this year, I think. What book are you up for this time?
Now, this year it's, forgive me for saying this, because this isn't about my artwork. It's an astonishingly wonderful book by Michael Rosen. I want to say that right off the bat. It's called A Great Big Cuddle. And Michael is a word wizard. I know this because I've read A Great Big Cuddle to a room full of 3-year-olds. And they've been rapt by Michael's words. It's wonderful. They haven't seen my pictures because I've been sitting at the front reading them. But it is such a beautiful book for very young children. And I'm tremendously honoured to be shortlisted again this year. And I'm going to be controversial and say I really shouldn't win it. I would love Michael to have that accolade, but I don't feel, in a sense, I've just been so sort of honoured, in a sense, to be awarded the Greenaway 3 times. And it is one of our absolute sort of top prizes, if not the top prize. And the reason it is so important, I feel, is it is a prize awarded by librarians. And that is a very particular sort of take on children's books. Librarians are enablers. They're not salespeople. What they do is they identify a reader with a book and hand a book to a reader and say, you're going to enjoy this. And I think that's really at the heart of what both the Carnegie and Greenaway is all about. Librarians as curators for both the past and the future. I mean, it's an incredibly important role, and the prize embodies that. I mean,
you've been, as the Children's Laureate, a sort of passionate supporter of libraries, and you're obviously supporting us here at our library today. Something you were saying before, it's kind of more or less the only place in society where you're not a consumer, you're not being sold something as a library.
We're talking about social spaces, within our towns, cities, villages, schools that are permissive areas. They are hubs. They have so many uses that they can be put to. The danger sometimes is that libraries are sort of rather sidelined. They're taken for granted. And one of the great sort of sorrows, in a way, is when a library closes, you lose something incredibly valuable within the community. And then it's very hard to get that back. And the things that libraries bring with them are things like a sense of community. They are havens. They are places where you can come in and meet like-minded people. You can be challenged, you can be educated, you can, use computer services and have help doing that. It is a gateway and a portal into all aspects of life. And that is both the tremendous, I think, strength of a library, but also the weakness, because what happens is so often our policymakers say, "Oh, yeah, well, you can do this somewhere else, and everyone's got a computer, and we don't need this. We've got the shopping arcade down the road with sort of where you can buy a book." That is to misunderstand the vital role that libraries play. What I like to do, and I've been doing this in the Children's Laureate role, is post up on social media wise words when I find them. And there was a beautiful piece by Angela Clark. She wrote a piece in The Guardian. It was online, and it was about her experience as a library user and as someone who in her 30s suffered a debilitating sort of illness that impaired her mobility and also affected her eyesight. And she needed access to books at a very stressful time in her life. And someone said, "Go to your local library, because they have a wonderful audio book section." She went along, she discovered this resource that she had sort of forgotten about. She had remembered it as a child, but as an adult hadn't gone into a library. Went and found this wonderful permissive environment, started to borrow audiobooks. She just wrote a very simple piece about how important libraries are in the community, how an isolated elderly person can come into a library and feel that sense of community. A harassed young mother with toddlers can come in and meet other mothers and feel better about it and take part in activities. And someone like Angela, sort of suffering a disability, can come in and receive this extraordinary sort of help and resource. And she says, that is why our libraries are important. I wrote out Angela's words, posted them with a little sketch. And on my Facebook page, where I have diagnostics, it's a public Facebook page, it had a post reach of 5 million. And I looked at that and I thought, this is what we know. We know the power of libraries in the imagination of the public as a whole. And that just showed me just how important libraries are. But politicians want to talk about other things. And we've got to all the time bring them back and say, by the way, don't forget libraries. Never forget libraries.
Just constantly reminding.
It is a constant thing. Yes, of course it is. It doesn't. You don't just sort of solve that and go away again. But as a librarian, in a sense, your job is never done. You're there to be here. That's the point. And we need libraries with resources, put into them, because that is when you really see a library sing. When you take resources away from libraries and they go into other areas, you lose an extraordinary support network that libraries provide. And that's the message we've got to get across and keep getting across.
You just mentioned your Facebook page there. You are very active on social media. You're always posting your illustrations and doodles on Instagram. You do live videos, I think, on Facebook and that kind of thing. I mean, can you say something about how you use social media? Has it been particularly important as Children's Laureate in reaching people through social media?
No, my goodness, I'm a 55-year-old man, for goodness sake, who has a Facebook page and Instagram and Tumblr and Twitter, and I sometimes stop myself and think, really? But what I've discovered, and this has been an experience over the last 4 years, when a very kind person gently introduced me to social media and said, well, you might like this. And I was very skeptical. But what I've been using social media for is to just post up pages from my sketchbook, to write out and illuminate sort of poems that are sent to me by friends of mine, to illustrate wherever I can what I'm doing, my daily role as an illustrator. And social media is a wonderful sort of place for that. I don't sort of go into sort of diatribes against sort of prevailing attitudes to things. It's not a polemic in a way. It's much more about my work as an artist. And I found I found that sense of community that can build up in social media a wonderful place. And it's something that is very akin to what libraries do in our communities. And I think it's quite interesting that libraries themselves are important hubs when it comes to coming in and using social media. That's another aspect of libraries. So it's been an extraordinary experience for me, and it's come into its own as I've been doing this role as Children's Laureate. What I've done is a drawing every day of what I'm doing each day of my laureateship, so that at the end of it, one can go through from over the 2 years, and there's a drawing for every day of the year, over the 2-year period. And it's been a lovely way for me to sort of go back and almost audit what I've been doing and say, this was the time I was in Guernsey, and I had that lovely conversation, that lovely podcast, in this beautiful sort of quiet room, which is another thing libraries provide, this sense of calm and sort of, thought. They're such wonderful, thoughtful spaces. I can go back, I'll look at a little drawing of myself doing this podcast thinking, yes, that's what I did back then.
It's almost like a diary, isn't it?
It is a diary. It's a visual diary. And what I've done is I've brought them all together, and my publishers very kindly agreed to publish them in book form. It's called Travels with My Sketchbook, 320 pages. So it's a bit of a brick of a book, but my royalties, I'm donating all my royalties to Book Trust, which is our UK charity that supports reading and libraries. So I feel I can bang on about it a bit and sort of do the hard sell, because it's going to a good cause.
Oh, looking forward to it. Chris Riddell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Listen to all of our podcasts and find out more about the library at www.library.gg.